Welcome to the Exam Study Expert Podcast, helping you hit the grades of your dreams at school, college, and university through the science of fast learning and lasting memory, the psychology of study productivity, and the secrets to great exam technique. And now your host, the Cambridge University trained psychologist who's dedicated his life to helping students study better and outsmart their exams, William Wadsworth.
Hello and welcome to the Exam Study Expert Podcast. I'm so excited to introduce my guest today, who's Dr Marie Buda. She's an expert on some fascinating and diverse topics, and what really unites them all is that they are ingredients which really take you from being a good student to one of the truly outstanding students. We're going to be talking about creativity, how to join ideas, how to think of new ways of looking at things. We're going to be talking about critical thinking, how to pass a critical lens on what you're reading, what you're studying. And we're going to be talking about good study habits at university, at school. I know Marie going way back to my own university, college days, where we sang together in an a cappella group. Think a bit like Pitch Perfect or Glee Club, perhaps, with slightly less polished dance moves. But I also knew her through the psychology department. She was doing her PhD when I was an undergraduate. So it was huge fun for me to record this conversation because we get to geek out on various bits of cool and fascinating psychology along the way as well. So I hope you really enjoy the episode. Let's dive right in. Marie, a very warm welcome to the Exam Study Expert Podcast.
Oh, thank you. I'm so excited. Yeah.
I think it would be really helpful just to start by, tell people what you're doing today and then how you got there. So perhaps right back to school days and then a kind of whistle-stop tour of what led to what you're doing today.
Sure. So I'm currently a cognitive neuroscientist, and I work as an innovation consultant. So essentially, I help big companies like P&G, Johnson & Johnson, with any psychology or neuroscience-related problems. That's my main job. Aside from that, I also help students who are hoping to apply to Oxbridge with their interview skills. And as I'll mention throughout, when talking about my journey, I used to be director of studies at Downing College at Cambridge. So I sort of use that background to help students. So if we're going to go back in time a bit, I grew up in Japan. I went to an international school. So my accent is not because I'm American, but because I went to an international school. So I'm half British, half Japanese. So I ended up doing the International Baccalaureate back in the day. And afterwards, I came over here to the UK and I studied psychology at the University of Nottingham. And after graduating from there, I did 1 year of a research assistantship at the same university and then went to Cambridge to study a PhD in cognitive neuroscience, where specifically I looked into the cognitive neuroscience of false memories. So, what are the brain bits that are involved when we recollect something that didn't actually occur? That was my PhD. And through doing my PhD, I realized that actually one of my true loves was teaching. So I decided to explore that avenue. And eventually I became director of studies at Downing College, where I supervised many students and also taught psychology there, which I enjoyed. But eventually I wanted to use my knowledge in an applied context, which led me on to my career today, which is using psychology and neuroscience in business. So that's the 101 of my life.
It sounds amazing. And there's going to be a ton of useful experience, I think, we can talk about today, and hopefully people will be able to learn a little bit from.
Cross fingers.
Exactly. So you were saying you do a bit of work with students today.
Yes.
I know one of the things you help in particular with is critical thinking.
Yes.
So what do we mean by critical thinking? What is it, and why does it matter to students?
Sure. I think one thing that I try to help students with is to change their mindset from a student mindset into a professional mindset. So critical thinking is all about not taking things at face value and reading a textbook and go, okay, this is fact. I'm just going to believe this. It's about questioning almost everything you read. Critically, chewing on the information is what I call it. So let's say that you read a theory in your biology textbook. Instead of going, okay, that's what I need to memorize and that's fact, to go, why is this correct? Do I agree with this theory? Is one theory better than the other? If I were to improve on this theory, how would I do it? Using, I'm trying to cultivate those kind of thoughts in my students. And the reason why I do this is because in real life, whilst, if you're studying for your A-levels or for the International Baccalaureate or for the AP or SAT if you're in the States, you just have to know the correct answer, write that down, and that's it. Once you go into the professional world, there are no right answers very often. And it's your job to go, okay, if I don't know what the right answer is, I need to figure this out myself. So I think critical thinking is about learning how to navigate that uncertainty and learning how to know, what is perhaps the strongest answer to some of the questions that you have. But they may not necessarily be the right ones. But, working through that fuzziness, I say, is critical thinking.
I guess it's not just professional world, is it? I mean, so if you're a student, I guess particularly when you get to university level, one of the things you'll really be rewarded for, and really kind of unlock those top grades, is being able to be a bit critical about
absolutely
whatever your given subject is, whether it's an art subject or a science subject.
Yes, absolutely. So whenever I used to teach undergraduates at Cambridge, about how to get the top marks, it was all about critical thinking and creativity. You can't just regurgitate papers. It's all about, okay, so what do you think about this theory? Where do you think the future of this research, where do you think it's going? It's about also putting your own spin on things and putting your own thoughts and ideas into it. And only then will you get the top marks. And that's the kind of stuff I want to help students cultivate, because they may not necessarily be taught that in school.
I love it. I think it's great. So what are your kind of top tips for getting better at critical thinking?
Well, I think it just starts off with, don't just take everything at face value. Next time you read a news story, think, where are these people getting their information sources from? Is this really true? Or the next time you think something is interesting, Googling a bit more about it and finding out a bit more about it. If you read a book, find another book that takes a completely different opinion and compare the two and think, which one do I agree with more or less? It's those little things that start you on this journey of critical thinking. And it's not a thing that you develop overnight. It's definitely a muscle you need to, continuously do and continuously develop. So just taking those baby steps every single day will help you on your critical thinking journey. And obviously, if you can then start incorporating that in your essays, that's even better. And you can work with your teachers. If you talk to them saying, I'd like to develop these critical thinking skills, I'm sure they'll be happy to help.
That sounds fantastic. You were talking about how to read, for example, the news with a slightly critical eye.
Yes.
And if you found a book that has one particular opinion, maybe find a book that has an alternative opinion and get that balance. And one of the things I remember from my days as a psychology student was the subject of cognitive biases and the various ways in which our brain sort of tricks us into making what on the face of it might look like bad judgments or kind of bad decisions. That's quite relevant to what you're saying.
Yeah,
isn't
absolutely. It? I mean, if we're going into the realm of psychology, confirmation bias is a big thing. If you have an idea already about something, you search for information that confirms that. If I believe chocolate is the best thing in the world, I will only find information that confirms this. That's confirmation bias. So one thing I do in my everyday life actually is that if I feel like I have a very strong opinion on something, I purposely go onto Google or YouTube and try to listen to people who have the complete opposite opinion to me, especially in this sort of political climate. I think it's really important to, hear out what other people have to say, just so we can come to a shared understanding. And even if you don't agree with them, you can at least try and understand where they're coming from.
Yeah, for sure. And that's almost the process of science. In some ways, it's not about trying to prove you're right. I've heard scientists describe a lot of their focus is trying to prove that they were wrong. And they spend 10 years rigorously trying to prove themselves wrong, and they just can't do it.
Yeah.
And that suggests that, well, maybe I was right after all.
Yeah.
Is there anything else we should be sort of thinking about as students when it comes to critical thinking, maybe in terms of how we should apply it to our essays or?
Well, I think when it comes to critical thinking skills in essays, it's about, injecting your thoughts into this, not just saying this is what papers say. What do you think about it? Once you've, say, put the information under your critical thinking lens, so to speak, and thought, which theory is better than the other, why, put that in your essays. Don't be afraid to do that. Don't be afraid to suggest where the future of this field should go to. You can start doing that now in your essays, and I highly recommend students to do so.
Awesome, I love it. Well, thank you for that. I think that's some really interesting takeaways. I also wanted to ask you a bit about creativity. I mean, that's your job now, right? Sort of helping, as you were saying, helping these big companies be more creative, be more innovative. Creativity is quite a big deal for us as students as well. And coming up with good ideas or linking together different ideas when we're working on our essays, for example. How do you see creativity as being kind of relevant to the work that students are doing?
Oh, I think it's incredibly relevant. In fact, I feel like, at least in a university context, the students that tend to get the high first, not just a good first, the high first, are the creative ones. So what makes them different? Well, I think they're not afraid to play. Basically, they're not afraid to play with their ideas, and they're not afraid to play with their writing. Instead of just, I think you can write about information, but one of the best students I ever had, she wasn't afraid to put in quotes from literature within her psychology essays. Right. Another student, one of the students that I had, both of them got top of their class. They were in separate years. He would write things almost like a science magazine. So they were very playful with their writing. So one thing I suggest to students is, you may be set on one way of writing things. Try something completely different. Think, if I were, say, writing for psychology today, how would I write this? Or if I were writing this as if it was a novel, how would I write this? And, it may seem like a completely ludicrous idea, but who knows? There might be something in there that might draw out a different way of writing and a different way of thinking.
Because once you get to university, there's a bit of credit for style and how you communicate your ideas. Yes,
because I think in the sixth form, when you're doing your A levels, it's more about just putting down the right things. Yeah. University, you have to take it to another level. Their stylistic elements start to come in. Yeah. And another thing is being playful with your ideas. So one thing, I actually learned this after quitting my job in academia and moving on to sort of the innovation field, was that in academia, it was all about why not? Why won't this work? So if someone was presenting their study or research, it'll be like, why won't this work? Or where have they gone wrong? Or but once I moved to my new job, it was about why not? And no matter how ludicrous the idea was, it was about embracing that, because from there you may actually get to the best idea. So it was about unconstrained thinking rather than constrained thinking. So if we were like, okay, let's brainstorm around this, it was getting a bunch of post-it notes and writing everywhere and, not putting the brakes on your thinking. I think that really helps with creativity. But another thing to remember about creativity is that it takes time often. Because one definition of creativity actually I read was that it's about joining two seemingly unrelated ideas. And I think that actually comes from, in psychology, we call it incubation.
Okay.
So
What's incubation?
Incubation is, it's a period of time in which the brain, sort of a very easy way of putting this, is when the brain sorts out things. So sometimes you need to sleep through things for the brain to sort things out. And then when you wake up the next day, you can find that sometimes suddenly the idea comes to you. So it's not, I think when I was in high school, I used to think that more was more, that, if you just studied more, then that would lead to greater effects. But actually, things like rest, sleep, your brain is doing something. And that's when it's incubating. It's sort of, if we think about a plant, it's when sort of the roots are starting to grow and it's just about to blossom. So that's incubation. And incubation is key for creativity. If you find yourself having a mental block, sleep on it. And you may be surprised. You might find suddenly the idea or a very creative thing will come to you the next day. So don't be afraid to take your time with things is another thing. So that kind of leads on to perhaps what we'll talk about later in terms of good study skills, which is, if you do plan out things, plan out that time to incubate your ideas, because you may need it.
I mean, a lot of people I talk to, say their best ideas will come to them in the shower or when they're out for a walk or on a jog.
Oh, absolutely. I completely agree with that. And my best ideas have come to me, as you said, either in the shower or when I was on a walk or right before I go to bed. There's definitely something there.
keep a notepad by the bed or
by the shower.
Yeah.
Waterproof notepad or something.
Yeah, no, well, seriously.
Yeah.
You mentioned brainstorming.
Yes.
It's something that from time to time, we have to do as students. I mean, I was a business student as well as a psychology student, and certainly had to come up with the odd sort of business idea or two. What's your advice for kind of how to approach a group brainstorm in terms of, the kind of perhaps almost the rules you set yourself as a group to make sure the best ideas flow?
I guess it depends on the kind of problem you're trying to solve. But if I use an example from my own field, in which we solve a lot of science and technical, sort of technology-related problems, unconstrained creativity can sometimes be a dangerous thing. So I've thrown a bit of jargon there. But if you just sit down and go, okay, let's just write anything, you can come up with incredibly creative ideas, but they may not necessarily be ideas that work. So often the suggestion is actually you do create, a small framework of, maybe this is what we're kind of looking for, and let's ideate or let's brainstorm around that. So especially if you're working in a group, you may come up with a bunch of, okay, this is where we're headed. Let's try and brainstorm around that instead of saying, let's just throw ideas everywhere and everyone shouts out things. One mistake, I wouldn't call it a mistake, but I took whilst I was in high school, whilst I was at university, I took my degree very, very seriously. And ironically, seriousness can hinder creativity.
And you use the word playfulness quite a few times.
Yes, yeah. If you think, oh my God, I need to create, I need to come up with the best idea that's going to get me an A star or that's going to get me a first. I mean, obviously you want to try and get, aim for the highest mark, but at the same time, that can actually hinder you. And I've seen that in my own students. The overly serious students tended to not be very creative. And I think if you do find yourself in that block, thinking, "Oh my god, I need to do the best," and just think, okay, if you weren't gonna be marked on this essay, and you're just gonna have a laugh. See what happens. See it as an experiment. We don't experiment enough in school, I think, because, every single thing you do gets assessed. So there's no room for experimenting. And that's where actually I think Oxford and Cambridge have quite a nice system, because we have the tutorial or supervision system. So for students who don't know what this is, basically at Oxford and Cambridge, we have a system where you get pretty much sort of one-on-one, one-on-two lessons with either a lecturer or a PhD student. And this happens on a weekly basis. And you're actually not marked on these things. And students can use the opportunity to basically play around, experiment, do something completely radical. And so if you don't have this opportunity, let's say you are assessed with everything, try something, maybe take an essay, write one as if you always would, as if, submit that, but try another thing and do something crazy with that. And then maybe you also ask your teacher saying, what about this? I was a bit playful with this, only if you have the time, of course, but see what happens. You might surprise yourself.
Yeah, I like that. I really like that. Yeah. It sort of feeds into something I was reading a couple of weeks back, where students sometimes approach, I guess, non-graded work with the mentality that, well, maybe I'll take it easy and then I'll really go for it when it matters. And the trouble with doing that is if you just try and get away with the bare minimum on the ungraded work, it doesn't give you that time to, as you were saying, to be playful and to really take those risks and to try out something new. And so it doesn't give you that time to refine and explore your approach and kind of figure out what works best. Yeah. And it means that you end up playing it perhaps fairly safe when the kind of graded assignment comes along.
Yeah, and one thing, if any of the listeners are thinking, oh gosh, that's scary. Absolutely, it will be scary because it's uncharted, unfamiliar territory. And what part of life is actually getting used to that feeling of fear when you do something new. When I started writing my blog, that was scary. But it also means you're actually going into new, exciting territory. So embrace that fear is what I would advise students.
It's a great life skill there. getting comfortable being outside of your comfort zone.
Absolutely.
For sure.
Yeah.
I also wanted to ask a little bit about good study habits, because I know this is something you kind of talk about with your sort of psychology hat on as well.
Yeah.
And it's something that we as students often struggle with. So what would your advice to students be on that?
I think aside from the basics, if you're get organized, that kind of stuff, I would say know yourself really well. You can read a lot of books out there that say this is the best way to study, but ultimately everyone is different and everyone has their own way of going about things. Some people like planning things meticulously. Other people like leaving things more out in the open. And there isn't necessarily a right or wrong there. It's about knowing how you work and being confident with that. Some people may actually think, I actually do my best work if I leave it to the last minute. Now, I don't advise leaving things to the last minute, but for some people, myself included, that's when the rush of energy tends to kick in. So, for example, that might include when you're planning, well, okay, if the deadline is here, I'm going to keep the last 3 days completely open because I need that time to study, and I know that's when I'm going to really start studying well. Other people will be like, well, actually, I like studying quite early. And it's just about really knowing yourself. But also, in terms of developing good study habits, one thing that I learned in general is, keeping a log of everything. General admin stuff, I know it sounds really boring, but I think it's quite crucial. That helped me during my high school years, university years, and PhD years. Keeping good notes, keeping a log of things, that can go quite a long way. Yeah.
One thing I've found quite helpful is being able to take that kind of life admin, the shopping and catching up on emails and, filling out this, that, the other form, whatever, being able to batch process it a little bit.
Yeah.
So you get into the flow. It disrupts your day a little bit less.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing, I would advise students, and this is linked with, really get to know yourself theme, is, everyone learns differently. I'm a hugely visual person. I have synesthesia. If you're interested in that, yeah.
What is synesthesia?
Just aside. It's when basically your senses get fused in your conscious experience. So when I see people, I see colors behind them. When I see words, I see colors as well. I hear music, I hear colors.
What color is exam study expert?
Well, it depends on whether or not it's that as a concept or that the words themselves. So for example, the letter E is a blue word. So because there's a lot of E's in there, it's kind of bluish. But exam study expert as a whole, I'm getting sort of yellow colors at the moment as a word.
Amazing. I'll get my logo redesigned right away.
So that's what I have. So any listeners, if you're interested, just send me an email and maybe I can tell you what color your email is. But that makes me a very visual person. So when I was studying in high school and at university, I would color code everything. So for example, proteins are red. Lipids to me is a very purple word. So I would then color everything accordingly. And that really helped me. But I knew people who were, more auditory oriented, and they would record themselves talking through the notes and would listen to that on the way to lectures, for example. And that seemed to help them. So it's again, knowing what works for you and being confident with that.
I'd probably just add an aside. One of the things I teach a lot is the kind of science of learning. And one of the things we've found, particularly in the last sort of 10 years or so, is just a slight footnote to that idea of knowing just kind of the complete freedom to find what works for you. Because there's some cases where the feeling of what's working is maybe a little bit seductive. And I think the classic example is rereading your notes or doing something quite passive, like maybe underlining, highlighting. And that's quite a popular way for students to study. But when you kind of run the research and run tests to see actually how effective that is in getting information into memory, it turns out that that kind of feeling of fluency you're getting when you're rereading stuff over and over again is a little bit misleading. It's the difference between familiarity with the material and actually being able to reproduce it cold from memory when it matters. So the kind of advice from studies like these would be to just kind of be careful when you're using things that maybe feel good, but perhaps aren't producing the benefits that you could get through, the other techniques like retrieval practice, where you're actually practicing remembering something from memory, perhaps using flashcards or, writing out what you know about a topic from memory in a concept map, or just scribbling it out on a blank sheet of paper.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. I think, definitely back in the day when I was studying for exams, that what you mentioned, sort of the recollection thing was so important, making sure that you didn't just read things, you actually put your notes aside and actually wrote things down to see whether you actually knew it. That was a very important part of the process. Yeah.
And what we kind of now know is it's writing out what you know isn't just a check on whether you know it or not. It actually is a really powerful way to actually get stuff into memory as well. So psychologists, decades ago used to talk about trying to remember something interrupts the act of forgetting it. Or as students, we want our forgetting to be as uninterrupted as possible a lot of the time. So.
It's so funny, isn't it? Like after, attending psychology lectures on how context affects memory retrieval, and, there's a famous memory study where they had scuba divers recollect things either on land or on sea. So they would they had scuba divers either memorize things on land, on the sea, and recollect things in the land or the sea. And they found that if you memorize something in the sea, you should recollect in the sea, or slightly better. I went to all my exams in my pajamas because that's how I revised. I didn't know whether that did anything.
That's hilarious. I took a slightly different approach. And I found a study room which was as close to an exam hall as possible.
Oh, did you?
Really quiet and intimidating, and individual desks. And so when I got to the exam hall, it was just like the room I'd been revising. So that's probably not a bad place to start talking a little bit about what to sort of expect from a psychology course at university, or and how we could prepare ourselves for applications if psychology is something we're thinking of studying at college or university. So I guess for students in sixth form or the latter years of high school.
After having read hundreds of personal statements, there were definitely some patterns that emerged that were sort of no things that I wanted to tell students, don't do this when you're applying. I think a lot of students, obviously they really want to get in. So they end up, reading books for the sake of putting it in the personal statement, or they will get jobs for the sake of putting it in the personal statement. And I don't really advise this, because put yourself in the shoes of the admissions tutor. If you're just putting things for the sake of name dropping, it actually is quite obvious to the admissions tutor. I mean, you may think, oh, they'll never find out. It actually is, because your personal statement ends up being quite bland. Because you're reading books because you feel like you have to, you haven't critically engaged with it. And that goes back to what we've been talking about earlier. If you're really interested in something, you start asking questions about it. You start reading more about it. But if you're just reading it because you feel like you have to, you get it done and over with, and you put it in your personal statement, and that's that. And that's why it's boring to read in the personal statement. So when a student is starting their admissions journey, I tell them, really start reading and looking at things that genuinely interest you. Psychology is a huge field. It ranges from everything from cognitive neuroscience, which is my field, to social psychology, to, public health. That even sort of comes into the realm of psychology. Pick up something that you really enjoy and really dig into that. And then maybe you can try and find some work or volunteering experiences, that links to that. And then if you enjoy it, that will come across in your personal statement. And that is what puts you apart from other students. Especially with the Oxbridge personal statements, which tend to be a bit more academically oriented in the sense that instead of saying, oh, I've done these extracurricular activities, they tend to be more, these are all the books I've read. Those tend to go into the category of just listing books. And as an admissions tutor, they're boring to read, I'll be completely honest. But the ones that made me go, ooh, this is interesting, are the ones where people had an interesting thought and they ran with it. I read one personal statement that actually just talked about one topic the whole time, but it was well written, it was well thought out, there was the critical thinking and the creativity, and that to me was a big tick. Another thing that I'll advise students is really understand what a psychology degree entails. A lot of people are drawn to psychology because they're interested in learning more about themselves and others. But psychology is a science. And when I say science, I mean hypothesis testing. It's about, coming up with an idea and testing it. It's about doing statistics. All of these, you'll be learning all of these as part of your psychology degree. So demonstrating an understanding of that in your personal statement and in your interviews will come across hugely positively.
Would you ever encourage students to reach out to either current students or indeed, teachers, professors at university, of course, they're interested in? Absolutely.
I mean, there are often the psychology societies of universities have outreach officers who are more than happy to help you with these things. If you go to the open days, ask questions about the degree and don't be afraid to really understand what the degree entails. Another thing I'll advise students hoping to study psychology is understand that actually the degrees are more, there's a lot more variety in the degrees than you think. On one hand, there are similarities between the courses because in order to be what we call BPS accredited. So this means that a university's course is approved by the British Psychological Society. This is the BPS. They need to have certain courses within their degree. So this includes social psychology, developmental psychology, biological psychology, and so on and so forth. But in the third year, there is just, the difference in the type of courses you could take is astounding. So I would actually be very mindful of this and really look through the degree and what it involves before making a choice.
That sounds good, and I think that's great advice for any subject. It's not just psychology. Yeah. Showing that depth of genuine interest and not just kind of superficially naming a book or two or, 7 because you thought it looked good. And also really getting under the skin of what the degree is. Even before, contacting someone who's involved in that university or that college, there's often a huge amount of information on that degree and what it involves just available online, not just on the course website, but you can dig deeper, go and look at the research that the professors are doing and find out more about what that university or that college is really interested in. So you said yourself you were involved in reality monitoring, memory research at Cambridge. That's one of a number of different streams of quite a wide number of streams of research that Cambridge psychology professors are pursuing.
I think one thing now the psychology websites are so much better than when I was applying to university, but at the time I couldn't find any information on what the courses entailed. And I actually, in order to find this out, I would look on, when you go onto the website, it'll say here for prospective students, here for current students. I clicked on the current students place just to find out what they were studying and what they were doing and what I would be exposed to if I were a student at this university to really understand things. Now, I'm going to admit to something, which is very embarrassing, but to make sure that other students do not make the same mistake I did. I was very naive and I relied on university rankings far more than I should have. So I chose to go to Nottingham University, which was a great choice, great university, great course, because it was number 1 in the rankings. Don't do this. Not because, I'm saying this because, I've looked at a lot of courses out there, and the universities that are ranked between, say, 1 to 10, there aren't that many differences between them, if I'm absolutely honest. Go to the university that offers you the courses that you want to take. That is my advice. Don't choose one university because one is ranked third and the other is fourth, so you go for the one that's ranked third. Don't do that. Don't make that.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I think, maybe just one other tiny thing. Not just the course you want to study, but perhaps if you've got a particular passion for something extracurricular. Yes. My brother, for example, was really passionate about music and wanted that to be an important part of his university life. So yes. Picking a university with a great music scene, as well as obviously the courses first and foremost for most people. And good luck.
Yes, good luck. And if anyone's out there, yes, best of luck.
I just wanted to finish with one final thought, if I could. So, one of the things I think people often struggle with is the bridge between what studying is like at high school or school and what it's like when they get to their university or college. It's very different because all of a sudden you far more than before have to control how you spend your own time, and you become the pilot of your kind of study week and how you spend it. Any advice for kind of bridging that gap and developing a good routine?
That's such a good point. It was definitely a shock to the system for me when I went to university for exactly the reasons that you mentioned. You go from almost a lot of times the school providing you with that structure to you having to provide the structure to yourself. I think it again comes down to organization. Planning out your day, planning out how you're going to write the essay, and being very proactive in finding the information. And if you're unsure of things, once you're at university, there isn't someone there who's going to hold your hand. You have to go out there and ask people, like, I don't know how to do this. Can you help me? Or I need to find this information. Where do I go? I think learning those kind of skills even now are useful.
When you talked about the planning, how if you're kind of new to planning your life and planning your day and your week, any sort of practical tips for actually how to do that? I think everyone's quite different. I think knowing whether you're a morning person or evening person actually quite helps a bit. So if you know that we work well in the mornings or work well in the evenings, plan your study time around that and stick with that. Make that a regular routine. I also think going out and choosing the same spot to study actually is not a bad idea. So for me personally, for example, I try and work out of my room, because otherwise if I associate relaxation and study in the same place, I find that kind of interferes with my thinking, and you can descend into procrastination if you're not careful. So it works both ways, doesn't it? It helps you get a better night's sleep if you haven't been working in the same room.
So, maybe deciding, okay, between... You can even see it as a 9-to-5 job, between this time and this time, I will go to the library and I will study and stick with that as much as you can. So then it becomes automatic. You don't need to wake up in the morning and go, should I know? Every single morning at 9 o'clock, I will be in the library. Then it becomes more automatic and you'll start to be, and you'll feel better about yourself. Structure actually makes you happier.
For sure. For sure.
Yeah.
And as you were saying, once you get to that point where it's just it's a habit, it's a routine, you stop having to get motivated and, big boost of willpower every single morning to get yourself to down to your library desk. It's what you do. It's how you spend your days.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Anything final on kind of university study habits?
A lot of the stuff I've talked about in this podcast are things I wish someone had taught me at university, actually, because very few people actually talk to you about critical thinking and creativity and how they contribute to you getting a high mark. So again, in terms of study habits, as well as, putting in that structure, putting in the time to actually experiment with your degree and have fun with it. I know I've been pedantic about this point, but please do try that.
Yeah. the time to do the basics, but also then the time to to explore a little bit. I love that. That's great. Well, look, thank you so much. It's been a fantastic conversation. I think there's so much that I wish I'd known when I was starting out. I guess on that note, I always wrap up by asking people if you were able to, step into your time machine, go back to 15, 16-year-old Marie in the playground in Japan. What would you say to her? What advice would you give to her?
Yeah, that is such an interesting question. Because I was thinking, when I was scribbling down things, I was like, well, there are, various pieces of advice I could give to 16-year-old Marie, like, don't take life too seriously, or life isn't all about academics, or, and so on and so forth. But would 16-year-old Marie have listened? Probably not. 16-year-old Marie was a perfectionist, very driven, thinking, getting into university was everything. So if that's the sort of mindset I had, what kind of advice would I have listened to? Well, I think, first of all, the first thing I would say to 16-year-old Marie is more is not more. 16-year-old Marie would sometimes stay up until the very early hours of the morning doing assignments because she thought more was more. It isn't. Life is not about studying more. It's about studying smart. It's about knowing the things that, that are for your minimum effort leads to the maximum output. Because actually, if you go with the more is more approach, you're just going to burn yourself out. Your writing actually is going to become more boring. Your ideas less creative, and that's not ideal. Get some sleep, relax, have that order, have that structure, have that consistency, but work smart, not more. That'd be the first thing.
I love that. I mean, that's the whole philosophy of what we try to do on Exams Today Expert. It's study, as you said, studying smarter, not harder.
Harder. Yeah, that's harder. That's the word I'm looking for. The second one is school is all about knowing, quote unquote, the right answers. So, knowing exactly which answer to put on your exam. But life is all about knowing and being honest with what you don't know, and working with others to fill the gaps. So I think this is a mindset I had to, really rewire over the years. So with school, you work alone. It's quite solitary. And it's all about, always having the right thing to say. Life is all about, being really honest with what you don't know. And I know this may sound like strange advice, but let's say that you're going to go into an interview. When I do interview training with students, it's so clear the students who are afraid to admit what they don't know in an interview, and instead end up waffling and trying to say what the right things are. And it's really obvious to the interviewer. What actually comes across far more positively is a student going, you know what? I don't know the answer to that, but I can give it my best guess. And don't be afraid to say that in life.
Or I'm prepared to engage with it and wrestle with it a bit.
I'm not afraid to wrestle with that idea. I don't know, but I'm not afraid to wrestle with it. And this is how I might do it. So only in knowing what you don't know will you actually start the journey towards the right answer. So, just changing that mindset a bit from the high school A-level, there's a right answer mindset to, well, let's see what I don't know. And let's see how I work through it. That's I'd tell my 16-year-old self to try and, think differently about problems, I would say.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Marie, look, thank you again so much. It's been an absolutely fantastic conversation.
Thank you for having me. I love being here.
You've been a wonderful guest. If I'm sure there'll be listeners out there that are curious to learn a little bit more about some of the things you've been talking about. What would be the best way for people to find you? Sure.
So I have two websites. The first is my personal website. You can find me on www.mariebuda.com. That's spelled www.mariebuda.com. So that's my personal website. There I write about life. I blog about everything from synesthesia, which I talked about earlier, to mental health. And I also you can read about my research there, and you can also see videos of me performing. So actually, Will and I go back. We used to sing together.
Yeah.
So you can see videos of me singing there. So that's if you want to, that's my personal website. For students who are interested in applying to study psychology in the UK, I've created a website for you. It's called psychologyadmissions.com. And there you'll find everything from what kind of books you want to read if you want to study for a psychology degree, to tips on writing the personal statement, to actually it's a central resource that has information on all the different types of universities. So one thing that I noticed was that if you wanted to apply to study psychology, you had to click on different universities' websites individually. So you'd go to St. Andrew's website, then you go to Durham's website, and you have to click. On this website, it's like a Wikipedia for psychology admissions. So if you go onto that, then all the information is there. I've actually picked out what I think is the most important things to know about. So for example, what the course structure is like. So that's all there. And I've also written, why it's important to look at these things. And of course, if you have any other questions, you can email me. My email addresses are on those websites that I mentioned, and I love hearing from people. So do get in touch.
Fantastic, and we'll put all the links in the show notes for people, so it's easy to find. I can't promise there'll be a video of us, a link to a video of us
singing,
but maybe we'll see. Awesome. Well, Marie, look, thanks once again.
Thank you.
It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much, Will.
I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. Links to all the resources that Marie was talking about will be in the show notes, so you can look those up at your leisure. Fantastic. Well, look, thanks again for joining us today, and I really hope to see you again next time. Until then, very best of luck with your studies.
Thanks for listening to the Exam Study Expert Podcast. Remember to hit subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. And please take a moment to write a review for our show in your podcast player.